Hello and welcome to The Drug Trip. This channel is here to feed the curiosity of those who would like to gain an insight to the effects of various drugs and substances through user experiences and stories, with our main goal being to entertain and reduce harm and abuse. We post regular trip reports every few days, so if you do enjoy these, we would really appreciate it if you subscribed. And more importantly, we love to hear our viewers' thoughts, opinions and experiences, so please leave something for us in the comment section and we may use it in a future video. Enjoy and be safe. The mushrooms tasted bad. Though this is something to be expected, I couldn't help but be disgusted by the disgusting texture and the even fouler taste. Nonetheless, I choked them down while trying to overcome my gag reflex as it sent the mixture of orange juice and mushrooms up my throat. I was able to finish them, but not without the familiar nausea in my stomach. I smoked some cannabis that was offered to me with relief, as it helped calm the nausea in my stomach. Despite my difficult experience with eating the mushrooms, I felt excited and ready for my next trip. I had chosen to trip at my boyfriend Alex's house. I had tripped here many times before, so I did not feel uncomfortable with that setting. This time, Alex had chosen to abstain due to the fact that he wanted to save his share to use with his other friends tomorrow. Our other friend Mark, on the other hand, had just so happened to bring mushrooms with him on the same day that I had my own. He, on the other hand, was already tripping. I was growing impatient while waiting for my trip to come on. I tried to amuse myself with things like talking to Alex and Mark while listening to music. However, none of those things seemed to soothe my impatience. Eventually, I walked outside and looked out at the street. I focused on the street and noticed that it seemed like it was swaying, almost like a bridge would in the wind. I blinked, and this vision had passed quickly. I looked over to the porch to see the house cat, Buddy. I tried to pet him, but he immediately retreated to his bed on the porch. I guessed that he probably didn't want to feel any of the crazy energy that was coming from me. I looked down at the floor of the porch that was covered in dirty footprints. I continued to stare, and eventually it seemed that the footprints came together to create a pattern of some sort. Again I blinked, and it had disappeared. It had started. However, I was still impatient for the full effects. I walked into the living room to find Alex and Mark. Mark had set up some of his music, and it had a pleasant, trippy beat to it. I lied down on the ground and looked up at the ceiling. I could see a little bit more colours than I normally would, but nothing really that impressive. I continued to meditate until I came to a question. What exactly did I want from this trip? Alex and I had been in an open relationship. We always had for the year we had been together. But it wasn't until recently that he was actually taking advantage of it. I had taken advantage of it before, but the occurrences were few and far between. The open relationship had been stressed for some time, due to the fact that Alex had told me he was not in love with me, and that he could leave me for somebody else. This was not a reassuring way to handle a relationship. However, recently, all that had changed. Alex did admit that he was in love with me, and that he wouldn't leave me for anybody else. Though this was relieving and reassuring, it felt like the jealousies and insecurities had been left alone to fester and grow. Even with Alex saying such things like that, I still found myself jealous and scared. Thinking about this, and the fact that now knew that Alex was in love with me, I found the question I wanted to answer. Why did I need to feel jealous? Why did one choose to pick fear over love? I pondered this for a while, and I eventually came to the conclusion that it was my choice to act the way that I did. I had full control over whether or not I picked knowing that I was loved or picking fear and jealousy. This was probably the most important thing I brought back from the trip. Even though it came in the beginning stages of it, knowing this made me feel empowered. As I felt these emotions, I could start to feel the vibration of the music picking up. I sat down on the ground and felt it move throughout the carpet and up into my body. This was an interesting sensation, to say the least. I concentrated on this for a while, and then started to talk to Alex and Mark again. Alex turned to Mark and told him that he thought it was time for him and I to take a shower together. Alex and I had talked about this previously and agreed that it might be interesting for me to have sex with him while on mushrooms. I, at the time, thought this was a very good idea due to the fact that I had sex with Alex on mushrooms beforehand, although it was a very low dose. This was probably the worst thing I could have done while under the influence at this time. As I came into the shower, I turned the water up. I typically like the water in my showers to be hotter than most people can stand, but I could tell I was taking it to the extreme. Alex came in and had to turn the water down due to the fact that he couldn't manage to stand in it. He told me that I was really hurting my skin by doing that, which could be seen by how red it had turned. This didn't really concern me, however, so I laughed it off. Alex put his arms around me, and I started to lose myself. My eyes closed and my body relaxed as I started to see visions. When I closed my eyes, I saw Alex, but as some sort of tree spirit. The bottom part of his body was a tree trunk, but his upper part was mostly human, aside from the fact that he was covered in soft blonde fur. The hair part probably came from the fact that I could feel Alex's chest hair against my face and upper part of my body. The vision was filled with many blues and greens and was very calming and comforting. When I opened my eyes, I was almost surprised to find that I wasn't in the vision that I saw. I looked up at Alex and gave him a smile and started to see his face morph. When I'm on mushrooms, it's common for me to see people's faces gain things like freckles and even wrinkles. I still found him to be handsome. This is where things turned from comforting to sexual. I couldn't seem to bring myself into a sexual mind space, as I only tended to get distracted by the hallucinations I was having. Things had started to morph and move, and sound had started to alter. I noticed that I was starting to hear similar music that I had heard upstairs, but in a different way. It had a different sound to it. I knew the kind of music I was hearing could never exist in nature, so I was very distracted in listening to that and soaking it up, as opposed to being sexual. I drifted in and out of the experience, oftentimes even forgetting that I was being sexual. I would be pulled back into it, however, by sudden strong sexual feelings that would come and go as the experience went on. We started to have sex, and the feelings were made interesting by the mushrooms. However, I was still distracted by the visuals and other feelings that I was having. I knew I wasn't going to orgasm, so I noticed to just patiently wait until my partner had. Alex suggested that we had doggy style, as it was easier for him to finish in while we were in the shower. Normally this kind of sex would be something that I enjoyed. However, I felt myself quite hesitant for a moment, feeling that I just at least wanted to have intimate sex while under the influence of these mushrooms. Nonetheless, I agreed. My emotions started to go haywire when we began to have sex again. I just wanted my partner to finish, but it was taking time. Suddenly, sound started to intensify. The water droplets hitting the bath became so loud it was as if someone had just placed my ears next to a jackhammer. Even though it didn't cause any pain, being a person who is sensitive to sound, I started to become somewhat frightened by hearing this. I wanted to speak up and tell Alex to stop, but I felt like I had lost my words. I could not bring myself to speak and express my needs to Alex, which normally wouldn't have been a problem. This is a very hard thing for me to tell. As we continued to have sex, my mind went into a state that was very disturbing. Even though I was having consensual sex with the person I'd been having sex with for almost a year, I felt almost as though I was being raped. And I really want to stress here that I used the word rape lightly. I don't think the experience was anywhere near as traumatic as what a rape victim would have gone through. However, while I was under the influence of these mushrooms, this was the word that came to me, and the feelings I felt. Due to this, I feel it's important here to use the word rape, to stress just how powerful mushrooms can be, and just how out of my mind I really was. The mixture of the extremely loud noises and overwhelming feelings made me feel like it was even harder to communicate. I could feel tears building up inside me, and I started to cry at the same time Alex had finished. Alex, confused, immediately put his arm around me and held me while I cried. Now that the experience had ended, I was able to communicate what I had felt. I felt embarrassed when I explained it to him, but he assured me that it was okay and that I was going to be fine. He held me there for a while, and my feelings started to return back to normal. Or really as normal as feelings can get under the influence of mushrooms. A few minutes later, I found myself on Alex's bed with him and Mark. I can't quite remember how the mental changes had happened, but I was in a depressive wave of thoughts. I started to feel like my life was meaningless and that I had ended up having the same life as everyone else has. There would be little excitement between the major landmarks I was supposed to have hit: school, a career, marriage, children, retirement, and then death. What else in life could I do? How could I escape this pattern and still live a productive life? These thoughts were extremely depressing for me, even more so because I didn't feel like I had the ability to speak, and I really wanted to tell Alex and Mark that they didn't need to be there, on the fact that their presence wasn't really helping me pull out of this thought loop. I managed to tell them that I missed Hawaii, and that was the end of what I could express. Eventually, Alex and Mark coaxed me into getting off the bed and walking outside. I was walking slowly, and I couldn't really keep up with them, nor did I care to. I wanted to be left alone to my thoughts. Alex would stop when he felt he was getting too far ahead of me, only for me to reassure him that I was okay by myself. Going outside really helped ease my mind to the state of the point that I could talk, but I didn't really want to. As I walked, I looked up at the tree branches to see that my mind had turned them into a spider web pattern. The light from the street lamps highlighted these spider web branches, making the imagery even more beautiful. I could only turn my head curiously as I looked at them, still too trapped inside of my own head to appreciate the beauty I was seeing. Mark and I stopped in a park while Alex went over to the corner store to find himself some food. I started to examine a tree that shimmered due to the rain that had just passed, once again ignoring the uniqueness it possessed due to my negative thought pattern. I talked to him how I felt about most people, including myself, and that we were just trying to work through the muck of a daily routine for the few blissful and beautiful moments that seemed too few and far between. I didn't want my life to be like this. I wanted beauty, I wanted transformation, and I wanted growth. I didn't want to continue being stifled the way I felt I was, but could see no other way around to it due to having to make money, having to work, and having to go to college so I could wrap myself up in debt so that I could just get a career. How was I supposed to find what I wanted out of life when I had put so much energy into things that didn't seem like they really mattered? Mark didn't have much of a response. However, Mark is naturally a very pessimistic person anyway. Mark and Alex returned back to the house while I stayed outside. I hovered under a tree to think, but I didn't remember much of what I thought, but I know I still wasn't taking me out of my thought loop. I returned back to Alex's house, only to see that his roommates were throwing a party for Stephen. I didn't like Stephen that much, so I wanted to stay as far away from him as possible while I was tripping. I retreated to Alex's room and sat alone trying to figure out my thoughts. Alex would come downstairs occasionally to check on me, until eventually I told him that I was going to be fine on my own and that he could go and have fun. Again, his presence didn't really make a difference in my thought pattern, so it was just more a matter of waiting to come down. Eventually I did come down enough that I could do upstairs and go to the party, but I mostly kept myself to myself during the evening. In retrospect, though the trip was not enjoyable this time, in hindsight it had taught me a lot. The next day I went for a long walk in the spring sun, thinking about what had occurred the night before, and I realised that I had forgotten many beautiful things that I had in my life, and it certainly wasn't as depressing as I had made it out to be. But it also influenced a good amount of change in my life. After the trip, I worked harder to find meaning, and not to waste it away stuck in a daily routine. There was always travel, and there is still so much of this worst world has left to offer me. And after all, I'm only 18. I haven't even experienced the wonders that I know I'm going to find. Plus, I haven't even met half the people I will know in my lifetime. Though there are unnecessary things to go through in my life that don't matter, there is still so much beauty and wonder in my life if we stay to open it. During my trip, I saw so many beautiful things, but my mind stayed close to them because it was too caught up in its own thoughts to realise how much beauty does surround me at every moment. And on a final note, I'd like to mention that I learned that a bad trip isn't to be feared. The next time that I encounter a bad trip, if I do, I hope that I can see it as a learning experience and try to move past the difficult feelings I encounter.